Let's bring in Florida Republican Congressman Michael Waltz, former Green Beret and a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So we just see these live pictures of weapons from the United States arriving there in Ukraine. Tell us where you are now on this issue, because I understand that the White House has been sending members of the administration to come and brief members of Congress.
Well, there's bipartisan frustration. I just received a briefing last week and went to Ukraine last month, and the frustrations on both sides of the aisle with the administration's strategy that's clearly failing. Biden's strategy of restraint is failing to deter Putin. He's afraid of provoking Putin. But at the end of the day, Putin has been very clear that he wants to rebuild the old Soviet Union. His diplomatic strategy is failing. I believe that Putin is using it to buy time to mass his forces with unrealistic demands that also plays well for him domestically in his propaganda. And this sanctions first strategy is going to fail because Germany is never going to get on board with the tough kind of sanctions that Biden is espousing, and the timing of it is off. Everything is in response to after Russia invades, rather than deterring him from invading in the first place. So I think along all of those fronts, we're going to continue to see a failure, and we're starting to see NATO kind of wake up with some troop movements, but really, frankly, it's a drop in the bucket. There's an entity called the NATO Response Force that every country contributes to. That's what this 8,500 troop alert that you're seeing to U.S. troops. But at the end of the day, they are going to go to Eastern Europe, to countries like Poland, Romania, Hungary, that are very nervous. They are not going to go into Ukraine, and Putin knows it.
I don't know if you saw the former ambassador with us last hour, William Taylor. He's very interesting. The summary of his argument comes down to this. He believes that neither side is budging, and he also believes if NATO stands together, they have a very good chance of keeping Putin from going into Ukraine. Based on your answer, I don't think you agree with that. But nonetheless, the ambassador believes that if you can keep that group united, that'll tell Putin something quite clearly.
Well, Bill, you saw President Biden slip in his press conference when he said a minor incursion or something short of a full invasion may split the alliance. Further, you just saw, I think, in an honest moment, the head of the German Navy certainly not aligned with a tough stand, and he resigned after making those comments public. At the end of the day, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline has created a dependency that I don't think Germany is going to walk away from, and they are not on the same page with the Eastern European countries that are much more nervous, that border Russia and want to take a tougher stand. So that's why the sanctions have to be in both dollars and euros. And if the largest economy in Europe is not on board, then I think Putin knows that the sanctions won't be as tough. And further, he has more to gain economically by absorbing Ukraine, its industrial capacity, agricultural capacity, access to the Black Sea. At the end of the day, the only thing, Bill, that's going to deter him is if he believes this is going to be more bloody and more costly than what he's estimating. We should be making statements that we will support Ukraine in an insurgency to resist a Putin-backed installed government. And we should have been accelerating the lethal aid a long time ago with the types that Russia most cares about: surface-to-air missiles, anti-ship missiles. Again, no U.S. troops on the ground in a combat role, but there's a lot more we could be doing to affect Putin's calculus now, and putting sanctions in place now that we would pull back when he de-escalates, not after the fact.
Congressman, thank you. We'll no doubt be in touch with you as we move forward.
Thank you. Michael Waltz,
so
Republican out of Florida.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.